the 25th. It's the 25th of the 11th, 2023, and it's I think it's 1 p.m. 1:04 p.m. and 1:04 p.m. and also Friendly Geordies did a video the other day in regard to BWS Liquorland and Dan Murphy's and people's experiences. That was quite interesting to see that video. I think it was Jordan Shanks or Friendly Geordies. I'm not sure which one. Now, I go to BWS at Canterbury. Very good store. They kind of know me. There's a few people in there who I'm a regular when I'm drinking my Guinness, but I go there and it's mostly very good service. As I said, they know me in there. Most of the people do. Good store. It's actually a really good store. I was sometimes going to Marrickville BWS, the one up on the hill past Marrickville Station. You go further up, not toward Marrickville Road, but the opposite way toward Earlwood. And occasionally I do go to the one on New Canterbury Road, down from Canterbury BMW, BWS there. Good service. I very rarely go to Liquorland. I don't go to Liquorland, and I never go to Dan Murphy's, mainly because in my area there is no Liquorland at Dan Murphy's. There's one in Brightly Sands, and there's one in Ramsgate. BWS, very good. That's what I was going to express. I was talking to Michelle about this yesterday, just the other day. Now, because we're waiting for the bus, and there was this thing, black and white photograph, but it was black and white photograph, and it's on New Canterbury Road, and it shows the trams in 1913, and I think back to that, and I'm like, oh, there wouldn't have been any band t-shirts, there would have been no metal t-shirts, everything would have been just different. No Woolworths, I don't know how long Woolworths has been around, no Woolworths, no Aldi, no Coles, I don't know how long Coles has been around, and there wouldn't have, my glasses, and there wouldn't have been a Woolworths either, so there would have, I just said that, but I just looked it up. Woolworths opened in Sydney in the Imperial Arcade, Pitt Street Mall, on 5th of December 1924. And also, there was no RSL clubs, so that would have been weird, because the first RSL club was formed in Sydney in 1916, and no leagues clubs either. And Canterbury Leagues Club at Belmore opened in 6th of June 1957, so there wouldn't have been any RSL clubs and no leagues clubs. Really weird. Yeah, there wouldn't have been RSLs. There were no RSLs yet. It's the Return Services League of Australia. Yeah. Everyone would have been mostly wearing suits of that day. Anyway, as I said, if we went back in time to the 1980s and spent a week in the 1980s and went out to the nightclubs, I tend to think of I know I pronounce this incorrectly, the Orient Hotel at the Rocks. I tend to think of that for some reason. The Orient Hotel at the Rocks, or one of many pubs or hotels in the Sydney CBD. If I went out on a Friday or a Saturday night, for instance, say I chose the mid-1980s, so I chose the mid-80s to do this, I went there. What music would you hear? Now, so because we now think of the 80s as classic, but we were in the 80s, they weren't classic. So the music, the 80s music that was being done at the time would have been the new music, which it was the new music. What were people mainly listening to? What would people be mainly listening to in the 80s who were in their 40s and 50s? well, they would have been listening to 70s music, so it would have been 70s music. Yes, but also, if someone who was in their 40s in 1985 and went out to a pub in Sydney, what music would they listen to? Well, 70s, yes, 70s, but more likely if you're going to go 30 from that era, if you go 30 years back to when people usually think 30 years back to be the classic music. So if you're in a pub in Sydney in 1985 and you're about 40 or 45, there's a very good chance that the music that you would like would be, we go 30 years back. So 75, oh, my maths is bad sometimes, 75, 50s, 50s music, 40s music, 50s music, talking, I don't know, Bill Haley in the comments, Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, talking what classical music, from the war, and 50s. There would be the 50s and the 60s. I think there'd be some 70s in there. But for that age group, they would be referring to their classic stuff. Would they like what they were hearing in the 80s? Well, I like to think so. What would people who are 45 years of age thought of 1980s music when they were 45 in the mid 80s? Good, interesting, yes. It was still good, still great. The claps didn't come until, I don't know, 2010. Yeah. So I just wanted to extend on that point. Okay, now to extend on that point further, I just realised that AC/DC were already started up in Sydney at that point. In by '85, they already had 3 or 4 albums out, and there would have been Sabbath. Sabbath had already been to Sydney, so you got a huge cross section of music that people are listening to, and yeah, Sabbath and Purple, and you've and AC/DC are huge by that point, and I think that people who at that age in 1985 would have definitely latched onto AC/DC. It would have been huge. So I think a big cross section of music, and the 50s, and the people would have had a huge soft spot for 50s. Yeah. And the new music, the radical new music of the 80s, there would have been 70s music playing in the pubs, on the jukebox. 70s music, there would have been 60s music. I think there would have been 50s music, like playing in the actual pubs, and there would have been 80s music being played, but it would have been the new music, which was on the charts at the time, and the newer generation would have been getting into it. So if the people going out to pubs were between the ages of 20 to 50 or 60, 20 to 60 age range, and just say pick people in their 40s who are going out to the pubs in Sydney in the mid-1980s, and what they're influenced by would be the 60s and the 70s, so there'd be a lot of 60s and 70s music being played. I'm talking about Sydney specifically, mainly. I mean, you could sort of, this could be an international thing, but I'm just mainly talking about Sydney, really, and America. Yeah, let's say include Los Angeles and New York and San Francisco. But in Sydney, because I never went out in the town in the 1980s. I started going out in the town in the very early 90s. Finished high school, started going out in the town in 1991. And what did I hear then? As far as I went to gigs, I started going to metal gigs. But I did go down to the Orion Hotel a bit, and I did visit numerous nightclubs and hotels in the Sydney CBD. What was playing? The new stuff. I mean, 80s, 90s stuff was playing. But if you went to a pub, hotel in the mid-80s, I think you would hear 80s music, which was new at the time. I think you would mainly hear 70s music on the jukebox in the 60s. In mid-1980s, you can even say like 1988. There's 1980 go in and you hear the new band Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction. Or, you know, what was it? I was just thinking Dr. Feelgood, but that didn't. No, that was 1990. 1989. That was 1989. Like you'd hear and the dress sense would be, well, the dress sense would be 80s, but mixed with 70s and 60s. I'm sort of generalising here because I think there are many dress senses. People dress tend to generally dress from a variety of eras. But it would have been a mixture of 70s and 80s. 80s was a huge thing. 80s was radical. Days and Confusers. Maybe the 80s will be radical. I think that if we went back to 1980s, it would obviously be very 80s because it's the 80s. But people would be listening to on the jukebox, I think, 70s, largely 70s music with a mixture of the new music of the 80s. And if we went back to Sydney in the 1970s, well, you'd hear a lot of 30s and 40s music, I think. You'd hear a lot of 30s and 40s music and then new music of the 70s, and everyone would be in their flares and bell bottoms, and everyone would be very. I would love to go back and spend a week in Sydney in the 1980s. Because I didn't go out in the town until 1991. I went into the city in the 1980s. I went in there, but that was mainly during the day. Went there a couple of times during the night. Not that often. Not really. I got to know the Sydney CBD in the 90s, which is the best time for it, by the way. The Sydney CBD during the 1990s and the zeros. Oh, that was the best time for the Sydney CBD. That was the best time for it. And when Sega World Sydney was there, watch my documentary, Sega World Sydney, best documentary on Sega World Sydney you'll ever see, first-hand account. Goes 2 hours and 53 minutes. I did have a 5-hour version, but I chopped it down because I thought, it's always explained. Yes. I mean, and trying to imagine Sydney without the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House. My grandfather Kieran, my grandfather, my dad's dad, saw Sydney without the Opera House, and his brother George, who lived in Newgate, Dad would say, oh, Uncle George would come down to visit Dad. So he'd come down, stop at the point of North Sydney and get the ferry across. And that was before the bridge. I can't imagine Sydney Harbour Bridge ever not being. I can't comprehend it. And then, of course, the tram yards at the Sydney Opera House. So my Cataldo, DePaulo, my mum's grandfather would have seen that because he came out. When was he come out? 1850 from Italy. Joe was born. Joe DePaulo was born. My grandfather Joe DePaulo, my mum's dad, was born in. I don't think he was born in Italy. He was born, but he grew up in Molinaloo. Born in 1900. He died in 1980. Passed away in 1985. And he was 83, so he was born in 1982. Yeah. So Cataldo, his father, came across from Italy, so he would have seen the tram sheds. And where the Opera House is now. And Opera House opened in 1973. Well, I was born in 1973. So I've always known the Opera House. Yeah. So, so we went back to going back to the 1980s. Sydney, spending a week in Sydney. Jeez. And also, would I visit myself? Oh, that's another subject. Maybe that's a different subject. I probably wouldn't. My younger self always wanted my older self to visit me, but that's a different subject. Not sure if I would. I don't know if I would. I'd be extremely careful about that. Totally different subject. Totally different subject. Did you experience Sydney CBD in the 1980s? And if you did, if you were out in the town of Sydney CBD in the 1980s, what was it like? I'd really like to know what it was like. Please tell me what it was like. And yeah, the Harbour Bridge and Opera House tram sheds, where the tram sheds used to be. But yes. And I was thinking about that. I think Sydney in the 1980s would have been radical. It would have been so cool. I mean, I was here for it, but I didn't go out of town. We had MTV with Richard Wilkins and Rage, and which is still going. And we didn't have Headbangers Ball here. We didn't get it. And we did in the early zeros. I think late 90s, early zeros when cable came in. But yeah. What was I saying? Lost track. The 1980s in Sydney. When you had Kylie Minogue and John Farnham dominating the charts, and you had Guns N' Roses and Motley Crue dominating the charts, and you had all that other good Australian music, In Excess and Midnight Oil. Yeah. So, yes. Good night, Charlie Man. Patrick, thanks for watching.